Well, good morning. Are you relaxed today? You relaxed today? I mean, Chiefs don't play today. They play tomorrow, so you kind of get to catch your breath. And I know the Royals don't play today either. They play tomorrow, but I went ahead and wore my Royals garb today because apparently some of y'all aren't praying quite hard enough, is all I can tell, all right? So it was fun to watch, and I guess while you're at it, pray for the replay booth that they can see clearly, right? Eyes to see. We pray that kind of stuff all the time. Do I sound bitter? You can pray for me too, all right? But it's fun, isn't it? It's fun. We are spoiled officially in Kansas City. We really are. But it's fun to be a part of. Speaking of fun, welcome to week 1 of how to vote without losing your soul. Aren't you fired up now? I mean, yeah, that was weak. That was weak. Occasionally, a sermon comes along where you don't need to do an introduction to get into it. You just tell people the title and they go, oh, right? And this is one of those. But I suppose if there were an introduction to this series, it would simply go something like this. I'm asking you, if anything that I say today, next week, I'm not sure how many weeks we're going on this. If anything bothers you, talk to me. And maybe you're bothered just by the fact that we're even talking about politics. If that bothers you, then I'm asking you to talk to me. I'm asking that we could do this different than what we tend to see modeled in the world when it comes to politics, and that we don't just walk away or we don't just fire back, but we talk, all right? So I'm asking you, if that happens, let's talk, because I would be honored and love to do so. We're going to start in Luke chapter 23. Luke chapter 23 is the context of Jesus being on trial, right? This is right before his crucifixion. So let's just read a couple of verses there to get started. Luke chapter 23, let's start with verse 1. It says, "Then the whole assembly rose and led him," that's Jesus, "off to Pilate. And they began to accuse him, saying, 'We have found this man subverting our nation. He opposes payment of taxes to Caesar and claims to be a Messiah, a king.' So Pilate asked Jesus, 'Are you the king of the Jews?' 'You have said so,' Jesus replied. Then Pilate announced to the chief priest and the crowd, 'I find no basis for a charge against this man.' But they insisted. 'He stirs up the people all over Judea by his teaching. He started in Galilee and has come all the way here.'" Now, the assembly that it refers to here that brings Jesus to Pilate is what we've learned to call the Sanhedrin, right? We see them even back in the Pentateuch, those 70 leaders, right, of the nation. They have themselves put Jesus on trial, and they have found him guilty and worthy even of death because he claims to be the Son of God. But the Sanhedrin, they are not political leaders. The Sanhedrin has moral power. They have religious power because they are allowed to have such by the Romans, who actually are over, right, the nation of Israel at this time. But what the Sanhedrin knows is if they want Jesus executed, they've got to get him to the Roman politicians because they have the civil power. And so that's exactly what they do. They come to the Roman leader Pilate, and their mission is to get Pilate to believe that Jesus is a political threat. In other words, that he's a threat to Pilate and the other leaders of Rome. So the question that gets raised in this scenario is, Jesus, what are your politics? Pilate's asking him, Jesus, are you a political leader? Jesus, what is your political position? And Jesus' answer is ambiguous. It is. His answer is ambiguous, but what I have come to learn in studying this text is, I believe with all of my heart, Jesus is intentionally ambiguous. I'm going to call him incredibly wise in being ambiguous, and it is actually beautifully ambiguous. See, Jesus is not being ambiguous in his answer because he's riding the fence. He's not. He's actually, in his answer, taking us straight to the truth. And any other answer would make it confusing. Any other answer would actually leave us disappointed. Any other answer could maybe even lead to some destruction. And so the importance of this little text, a lot of people don't realize. All 4 gospel writers record it. The question that Pilate asked and the answer that Jesus gave, all 4 gospel writers record it. There are not many things, there's not a big list that all 4 record. This is one. They saw it incredibly important. So look again at Pilate's question to Jesus, verse 23. Pilate asked, "Are you the king of the Jews?" Now, I think when we just tend to read this story, in our minds, we tend to often translate it, Pilate's asking Jesus, "Are you the Messiah?" Are you, and in our minds, we're thinking the religious Messiah. But that is not what is in question here. What was it that the Sanhedrin accused Jesus of as they bring him to Pilate? He is subverting the what? The nation. He's speaking against taxes to who? Caesar, right? This is not a spiritual question. This is a political question. He claims to be a king. And they want to convince Pilate that Jesus is trying to get people to disobey Pilate and disobey Caesar and instead follow him. Pilate's not asking, Jesus, are you the one that brings salvation? He's asking, are you the one who opposes us? Are you a political figure? What is your political agenda? Now, people wrestled with this question all the way through in terms of when we see Jesus' life. Remember the story after the resurrection that we often refer to as the road to Emmaus? You know that story? Where after Jesus' resurrection, he's walking along and there are disciples walking with him and they don't know it's him, right? If you'll remember, one of those disciples asks the question, or he makes the statement as he's walking along, "We thought he would redeem Israel." Y'all, that is not a statement saying we thought that he would be the one who would spiritually make us right with God. That statement means we thought he would be the leader who rose up and got us out of slavery in Rome. That's what they thought. This is not a spiritual question. This is a political question. And Jesus' answer, let's look at it one more time. You have said so. Now, I want you to write down, if you would, just this little kind of, I want you to write down what the literal translation in the Greek in terms of what Jesus says here, okay? Here's what he says. You say. That's it. That's what this is. Jesus literally says, you say. Okay, what does that mean? That's the beauty of it. Now, some of the English translations of the Bible that I looked at this week actually will translate this phrase as Jesus saying, yes, as you have said. And I'm telling you, that's not accurate. It's too far to the yes side. That's not what it says. It says, you say. Even this translation, you have said so, you know, like when somebody puts something on you and you're like, well, that's what you say. What is that? It sounds like a no, doesn't it? I mean, when you reply that way, you're inferring. That's too far the other direction. It's not a no. It's not a yes. It's not a no. The statement, the little phrase that Jesus uses, it is right in the center. I like to say it is perfectly clear ambiguity. That's what it is. It is perfectly clear ambiguity. Now, if you think about it, if Jesus says yes, I'm building my army, I'm gathering votes and soldiers, and we're going to wipe out the Romans, come on, that would have been misleading to what we know his identity and mission to be. But likewise, if he had said, no, I'm just a spiritual leader who gives peace in people's personal lives, but I have no claim over every part of life and dimension of reality, well, that would be misleading too, because we know who he is. People want Jesus to say, yes, I am, or no, I'm not, and he won't do it. And I think to get at the heart of what Jesus is really unpacking here and what we're going to see by the time we're done, here's the way I believe we could summarize. He's saying, in the narrow sense, I am not political. But in the broad sense, I am very political. In the narrow sense, I'm not. In the broad sense, I am very. What do I mean by that? Let me show you, all right? So let's start with, what does he mean by I'm not? What would that be, that he's not? In the narrow sense, he's not political. Well, the point that Luke shows us in his account here is that the religious leaders are threatened by Jesus, aren't they? Yeah, and they know he's got power. I mean, they've seen him do miracles. They've seen what he can do with the crowds. The religious leaders, they're afraid of him because they know he has some power. But the political leaders, they are convinced he doesn't have any power. Now, I think sometimes when people are telling the story of Jesus' trial and crucifixion, the way we sometimes can hear it told is Jesus was arrested, by the Romans because they were threatened by him as a king. But is that really what the story says? Did they really perceive him to be a threat? Well, let's just read it and find out. We left off with the religious leaders saying to Pilate, hey, this guy, he started in Galilee. He's been stirring things up, and he stirred them up all the way here to right where you are in Jerusalem. Let's pick up the story. On hearing this, Pilate asked if the man was a Galilean, right? They made reference to Galilee. When he learned that Jesus was under Herod's jurisdiction, he sent him to Herod, who was also in Jerusalem at that time. Just so happens. When Herod saw Jesus, he was greatly pleased because for a long time he had been wanting to see him. From what he had heard about him, he hoped to see him perform a sign of some sort. He plied him with many questions, but Jesus gave him no answer. The chief priests and the teachers of the law were standing there, vehemently accusing him. Then Herod and his soldiers ridiculed and mocked him. Dressing him in an elegant robe, they sent him back to Pilate. That day, Herod and Pilate became friends. What a sad statement, isn't it? That day they became friends. Before this, they had been enemies. Pilate called together the chief priests and the rulers and the people and said to them, "You brought me this man as one who is inciting the people to rebellion. I have examined him in your presence and have found no basis for your charges against him, neither has Herod. For he sent him back to us. As you can see, he has done nothing to deserve death. Therefore, I will punish him and then release him." I want you to understand we are dealing with two political leaders here, Pilate and Herod, who are two of the most paranoid people you would ever meet in your life. They always operate with a paranoia of who is trying to take our job, who is trying to overthrow, who will get us in trouble with Caesar. And both of them say we find Jesus not to be a threat. Y'all, these are two people that at the first hint of any threat, they would snuff you out, not even a second thought. Herod is the son of Herod the Great. Anybody know anything Herod the Great did in the Bible that's recorded in the New Testament, like Jesus' birth? He's the Herod who said all the baby boys are to be killed. Remember that? Why? He heard that a king had been born, and he's what? He's threatened. He's paranoid. He orders that all the baby boys be killed. That's Herod's dad. Caesar Augustus once made a statement about Herod. He said, "I'd rather be one of Herod's pigs than his children. The pig's life expectancy is longer because they are not perceived to be a threat." That's who you're dealing with here. Both Herod and Pilate constantly deal with paranoia. And they both said, we don't see Jesus having any political power. And so they mock him. That's why they mock him. They're not mocking him because they think he's a threat. They're mocking him because they think he's nothing. So we just read where Herod's soldiers mocked him, right? Put a robe on him. Well, so did Pilate's. And in Mark chapter 15, I want you to see just a couple of verses that describe it. Look at this language. They put a purple robe on him. What's the significance of a purple robe? Royalty. They're mocking him as a what? A king. Then they twisted together a crown of thorns. Who wears a crown? A king. They're mocking him. And they set it on him, and they began to call out to him, "Hail, King of the Jews." Again and again, they struck him on the head with a staff and spit on him. Falling on their knees, they paid homage to him. They're mocking him as a king. Not because they think he is one, but because they just show utter contempt for him. They don't recognize Jesus' power because Jesus' power is so different than political power. And it's why Jesus answers the question the way he does. Typical human political power is defined by control and self-promotion. It is. Now, in some parts of the world, that control is extreme. In other parts of the world, that control, right, looks like legislating laws that determine what people are to do, and then if they don't follow those laws, then you punish them. But typical human political power involves control, it involves force, it often involves coercion, and then self-promotion. I know that's a shocker to you where you live, right? In terms of all the political stuff you see. Can you believe that typical political power is about self-promotion, where it's all about building up your own reputation, building up your own name, taking credit for anything that you possibly can, and you do not ever admit that you are wrong unless admitting that you are wrong somehow actually makes you look stronger. You just simply do whatever it takes to lead in the poll, right? And so here's Jesus, who takes on the role of a servant. And I think Pilate and Herod are sort of like, Jesus can talk about sacrifice and truth all he wants to, because that's not power to them. Human political power is defined by control and self-promotion. But Jesus' power is defined by change and self-emptying. Jesus' power is not about control or force or coercion through external laws. But Jesus' power is about bringing change that occurs from the heart. Jesus' power is not about self-promotion. Jesus said, when I am lifted up, I will draw, right, all to me. But when he said, when I am lifted up, what was he talking about? A cross. When he said, I'm lifted up, he wasn't talking about self-promotion. When he said, I am sacrificed, it's not about self-promotion. It was about self-emptying. And isn't that true? That if you really want to see change happen in someone's life and you be a part of seeing that change happen, you got to decide if you're going to be vulnerable, don't you? Because you know you're not going to be able to just bark out external commands and see people change. If you're going to be a part of somebody changing, it's because you're going to have to open yourself up, which even means to criticism. You're going to have to open up your heart and your life and let them in. Controlling and self-promotion are linked. Changing and self-emptying or losing yourself are linked. The political leaders think Jesus has no power because he does not operate with the same kind of power they do. And so I think the ultimate mockery, all the mocking that goes on, the robe, the crown, the ultimate mockery is on the cross. Matthew 27 records it in verse 42. They say, he saved others, but he can't save himself. He's the what? King of Israel. In other words, human political power says the way that you save others is to save yourself. But the truth was, Jesus was saving others because he wouldn't save himself. That is power. To voluntarily lay down life for another. That is power. And the reason Jesus didn't play the political game is because he knows it's just a game. It is not real power. Now don't misunderstand me, and I think we'll talk about this in this series. It has an effect. Political power has an effect, right? Issues, things that are put into play, they have an effect. It can be good or bad, but they can control for a time, but it will not last. Self-promotion for legislation, for public, it can be done, but it is so superficial, it is limited. So imagine the scene. Imagine the scene. There stands Jesus in front of Pilate, and everybody who sees this scene would say, Pilate has Jesus' life in his hands. Isn't that funny? Pilate has Jesus' life in his hands. And yet we know that with one word, Jesus could have spoken one word and just totally wiped out that entire crowd. Pilate laid dead on the pavement. One word, it would be done. But that would have accomplished nothing for you. And it would have accomplished nothing for me. We wouldn't be here today claiming that we could know God, that we could be called his kids, that our identity is in him. It wouldn't be so. So Jesus didn't save himself. Y'all, that is power. And 2,000 years later, the fact that we stand and sit here today and get to say we are who we are in Jesus proves it is power that never fades away. That's why Jesus answers the question the way he does. Some of us maybe need to be reminded that Jesus does not give you a political policy agenda up front, so that in knowing it, you can choose whether you're going to follow him or not. If he did that, who would be the king? You would be the king. Because you're saying basically, okay, I got my politics, I got my policies, I need to know where Jesus stands, and then I can decide if he lines up with me or not, and then I'll determine whether or not I follow. Jesus says, you come to him first with everything. And then he shows you what he stands for, therefore what you stand for. My point is, policies don't determine Jesus. It is Jesus that is supposed to determine the policies on which we stand. So let's be clear today. Jeff, are you saying that people should not be involved in politics? No, that is the last thing that I'm saying today. I actually pray that some of you, that people of Heart of Life, would walk a political road. I really do. But I pray that you walk a political road following Jesus. That's the point. Walk the road behind him. Do you really think that self-promotion has to be the way politics works? No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. What if somebody's following Jesus and begins to self-empty the way he walks? Now, I'm saying, think of it this way. I think we look at politics sometimes in our world today, and it's just so messed up and drives us so crazy. It's terrible. But think of it this way. Back in Luke chapter 7, so same book, Luke, back in chapter 7, there is a woman who shows up at a dinner party that Jesus is attending, and the Bible very clearly tells us that she was a prostitute. The scene is she is at Jesus' feet, and her tears are wetting his feet. She pours perfume on his feet. She's wiping it with her hair, right? That's the story. And it's this beautiful picture of a woman who has come to Jesus, who's saying, I have always thought that sex is what moved the world. I always thought that through sex, I could somehow find what I now know only Jesus could give me. the belonging that I was looking for, the fulfillment that I was looking for. It's a beautiful story. Here's my question. This might seem weird. Nobody's ever asked you this question at church on Sunday before. Can she ever have sex again? It's like, well, sure she could. I mean, if she were to meet a man and they get married, and in the context of how God says all that should work, that she could, yeah, absolutely. But no longer is sex her idol. No longer is her identity tied to sex. No longer is she a slave to it. It's not what drives her life anymore. Y'all, politics is the same way. And you're like, did Jeff just say politics is like sex? Kinda. Here's what I mean. If you don't know Jesus, you will try to accomplish through politics what only Jesus can do. You want to change things. Yeah, we do. I want to see things change. You want to see things change. But y'all, we got to be careful in that politics can only change things at the surface level. And don't misunderstand me. Some of that's worth fighting for, and we will talk about that as we roll through this series. But if you make politics your idol and you start trying to make a god out of the market, or you start trying to make a god out of the state, you will eventually find an emptiness. It will disappoint. It is not eternal. Only God can give you mission impact that really changes the world after you lay down your politics at Jesus' feet. Then get up and get involved in politics. That's what I pray for. After you lay your politics at his feet, then get up and follow him into politics. So here's kind of my summary today. Jesus, how is Jesus not political? It's because his power is different than political power. But how is Jesus political? It's because his power changes every part of your life, even politics. Every part. I think I can illustrate this a little better if we just read one more section of the story, because there is a third political operative in this story. Besides Pilate and besides Jesus being questioned here, what surfaces next is a real political revolutionary. We would call him a revolutionary, one who caused an insurrection, even to the point that he was willing to kill somebody, right? Now, at one time, we would probably read those kind of stories and go, well, that's crazy talk. But now we live where we live, and we know how crazy all of that can be. It's Pilate's idea. It was custom, apparently, that to release a prisoner at a certain time of the year, and so Pilate's idea is there's this guy named Barabbas. Jesus hasn't done anything here. We know what Barabbas has done. Let's give him an option, and surely they'll free Jesus. But here's what happens in verse 18. But the whole crowd shouted, "Away with this man, Jesus. Release Barabbas to us." Barabbas had been thrown into prison for an insurrection in the city and for murder. So come on. I mean, this is a guy who would kill to overthrow the establishment. That's his mindset. Wanting to release Jesus, Pilate appealed to them again, but they kept shouting, "Crucify him, crucify him." For the third time he spoke to them, "Why? What crime has this man committed? I have found in him no grounds for the death penalty. Therefore, I will have him punished and then release him." But with loud shouts, they insistently demanded that he be crucified, and their shouts prevailed. So Pilate decided to grant their demand. He released the man who had been thrown into prison for insurrection and murder, the one they asked for, and surrendered Jesus to their will. You know what the name Barabbas means? It means son of the Father. That's what his name means, son of the Father. And if you read this story in Matthew's gospel, Matthew doesn't just call him Barabbas, but Matthew attaches a double name to him. Do you know what Matthew calls him? Jesus Barabbas. Look it up. And so all of a sudden, see, I don't think Matthew is coincidental in all of that. All of a sudden, we got two Jesuses, we got two sons of the Father, and we got two revolutionaries. Just a very different way. Barabbas is me. And Barabbas is you. Because come on, when Jesus is killed for Barabbas' sin, what is that a picture of? I think that's the picture Luke is painting for us. Come on, imagine Barabbas being in that prison. And you know, I imagine an angry man. I mean, I do. I imagine a heart that is angry. I mean, to go so far as to kill, right, for your cause. And an angry man, and yet there's something in him that also knows he's going to pay the price. He knows that Rome doesn't mess around. They may leave him in prison for a while just to torture him, but he knows he's going to die, and he knows crucifixion, and he knows about nails, and he knows about the suffocation that would happen on that cross. And so the day comes that those soldiers walk to his cell, and he thinks the day is done, but the message that is sent is, you are free. You are free. And literally within hours, Barabbas would have been able to look upon a cross and, like, literally be able to say, those are my nails. And he's dying my death. And I am released. Y'all, that is the good news of Jesus. That is the gospel, full and clear, that God made him who knew no sin to be sin for us. It's why Jesus didn't punch back. That's not the ultimate power. The ultimate power is that he would willingly lay down his life for us, taking the punishment for us, and therefore he could take our sins away and give us his freedom. If you have put your trust in Jesus, then you, like Barabbas, have been released. And now when God sees you and how he treats you, it is as though you never did anything wrong. That is revolutionary. Because come on, if Jesus has done that in you, isn't it true that all of a sudden your wealth is not as important anymore as Jesus is now? Right? Isn't it true that your citizenship is no longer as important as Jesus is to you now? Your class, your wealth, your citizenship, your race, you name it, none of that compares now with the fact that we know Jesus. Our whole attitude has changed, and now he has set us free to be able to go and make the greatest impact that we can, knowing that the only way to change the world in a way that will last forever is to fill it with the gospel of Jesus. The same gospel that set us free. That becomes your life mission. That is real impact. That is what lasts. How is Jesus not political? His power's different than political power. How is Jesus political? His power changes every part of your life. And because Jesus has claim over every part of life and every dimension of reality, including politics, in this way, Is Jesus political? Yes, he is incredibly political. Y'all, he owns it all. He owns it all. So I know, and this is where we're going, I know you get sick and tired of the arrogance and the selfishness and the lack of wisdom that is often now displayed when election time rolls around. I know. Even when you choose, you still, just the arrogance and the selfishness and the lack of wisdom at times, it just leaves you nauseous. But y'all, I think we also need to be reminded that we live under a pretty amazing system of government, truly, compared to what most places in the world live under. The checks and balances in our system of government are pretty remarkable. And we have a unique opportunity in the country in which we live to be a part of affecting change at times, and one of those ways is voting. And so does it really matter? Yeah, it does. It does matter. Because a lot of times there are moral issues that are at play. We'll talk about that. There are freedom issues that are at play. There are defense issues that are at play. There are economic issues that are at play. Does Jesus care? Yeah, he cares. Yes, he cares. Does he care about politics? Yes, he does. He owns it. And what happens affects people's lives for better or worse. But today, I just want us to start with making sure we realize, even if we get all the laws passed that we want passed, right? If we get all the laws in place that we want in place, they are external and they are temporary. And again, don't hear me say that I'm not for fighting for what we should. Don't hear that. But I'm reminding you today that the greatest power is the power of the gospel. It is the power from the inside out and the power that is eternal. Politics is not the way, the truth, and the life. Who is? Jesus. Politics is not our ultimate hope. Who is? Come on, who? Politics is not the greatest power. Who is? So here's my question. Does the way you speak about politics, candidates, issue, does it reflect the fact that you believe those truths about Jesus? In other words, I'm asking you, like people you know, if you point blank ask them the question, like in light of the words that they hear you say most of a day, what would they declare you think is more important? Now, come on. I'm not saying politics isn't important. Don't change my words. Don't. We're having a series because they are, and Jesus says that they are. But if people just evaluated all of your words in a day, what would they say that you believe matters most to you? And it's just really important before we dig into this series of issue and issue and issue that we make sure we know the answer. It's Jesus. It's Jesus. I know it is frustrating. It's part of why we're doing this series. I hear it in the hearts of people. I hear people wanting to hide under their bed until November is over. Seriously. There are some people that love it. There are some people that are, but there are people that it just absolutely aches their heart. It drives them to an anxiety level, right? I know it's frustrating, and there are times where we need to be heard regarding what is wrong. We're going to talk about that in this series, but let's make sure in doing so that we speak more words about Jesus than we do words of complaining about politics. Let's speak about him. So let me leave you this way this week, and then we'll pick it up next week if you come back, all right? Think about this. Barabbas was a guy who wanted to destroy the system. why in the world would they let that guy go free? Like, Barabbas is a guy, he wants to wipe them all out, and he has already proven it because he killed somebody. Therefore, they got to realize he will kill people to get to what he desires. Why would they set him free? He has already made things tense with the Romans for the Jews. Why would the Jewish leaders not realize that Barabbas at any point could turn on them? He sees them as well as a part of the establishment. Why would they want to set Barabbas free? Well, if you let Barabbas go, you can bet the house he's going to start another riot. He is. But if he does, you can just call in the SWAT team if you need to. If he does, you can surround him with enough armored trucks to probably hem him in. If he does, you can find out where he's keeping his weapons stash and you can raid his house. You can always stop Barabbas. But how do you stop Jesus? With no guns, no ammo, and he's shaking up an entire empire. There's only one answer. You got to deal with him now. You got to deal with him quick. You get rid of him. You kill him. And so that's what they did. They killed him. They buried him. And they said, that's the last that we will ever hear of this revolutionary. And 3 days later, Jesus pulls off the greatest political coup in history. Are you the King of the Jews? Yes, I am. Let's pray. Lord, my heart hurts when I watch the battle take place around us right now. I realize it's a battle that's bigger than flesh and blood. And yet, God, just to watch the anger, the hatred, the fighting, God, it breaks our heart. And then when I'm watching what it does to people, God, trying to figure out how to navigate all that, trying to figure out how to survive all that, God, I'm asking that maybe in these few weeks, you could teach us some things from your word to help us understand how you really change the world. Today, we're going to start by thanking you for a power that is greater than any politics. And today, I'm asking, will you give us the politics of Jesus? Yeah, that we'll know how to fight the right way for what's right. But also that we will fight, being reminded that it's really through hearts that change because of the gospel. So God, I'm asking that you would unleash a church that in these days will speak of you and will walk as though we truly believe our hope is in you. God, will you help us? Will you teach us? Will you give us courage? will you give us humility? Today, we are trying to start by laying our politics at your feet. And then, as we get up, we will follow you into the politics. Jesus, thank you for loving us. Thank you for what you're going to do in our hearts. May our heart be yours. In the name of Jesus, I ask it. And all God's people said, amen.